But first of all, explain to everybody Invipop and its journey.
Yeah, so Invipop is essentially born out of a problem we had at Cabify. So in the early days of Cabify, we focused way more on the B2B side. While we were growing and trying to find out how the product was going to operate and everything else, we focused on features. And one of those features was being able to issue invoices to corporates, companies who were using the service, whose employees were using the service, and wanted an invoice at the end of the month so they could deduct taxes and everything else. And we did this in the very early days of Cabify. So in Spain, what that implied was issuing a PDF, doing all the tax calculations, issuing a PDF, which reasonably straightforward. The problem was when we started launching in Latin America, we discovered the new regulation there related to electronic invoicing, whereby the local governments and authorities required you to send in real time copies of all your sales and your invoices to the government for a seal of approval, get a response back, then you could send it to your customer. So what that implied was technical integrations, using local providers, direct to the government, absolute nightmare. We just did not have the resources to adapt the product to be able to cope with that. So what we ended up doing was just doing everything manually, just getting people locally using Excel any way they could. And so it was back in 2016 I came with the idea, hey, wouldn't it be nice if there was a solution out there, you just have one single integration, and then this integration point dealt with all the local complexity. So that in essence is what was the birth point of Invipop. That was back in 2016. I ended up leaving Cabify towards the end of 2017 to go to a fintech spin-off project. I was there for a couple of years, and after that period, deciding what to do next, I saw that nobody had kind of solved the invoicing problem, and the European Union was starting to enforce more regulation, so the same complicated regulation that happened in Latin America was now starting to come to Europe. So we thought, hey, let's try and make this a little bit easier, and that's when we got started with Invipop.
Congratulations. I mean, Invipop is just one of many, many companies that have spun off from Cabify. What do you put that down to? Is that one that Antonio himself, his mentoring, his inspiration, the culture at the company?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Definitely the company culture. It's a place where we try to look for people who are, thought out of the box, want to do something a little bit different, and Cabify is a great environment for that. But to be honest, there weren't that many startups in Spain at that time period with these kind of global ambitions. So being able to work at a place like that, I think helps tremendously to make that kind of extra push to try and want to do something yourself, and just getting a little bit of experience as well, working at a startup that is constantly changing, constantly growing. I think it helps massively just to give you that extra push to do something on your own, to do something separate.
How do you get that company culture right, do you think? What are the key elements?
I wish I knew.
Well, what was it like working there? Just explain a little bit the day-to-day.
We enjoyed it. That's one of the key things. We had a good time at the end of the day. We enjoyed, and we worked a lot, but everything we were doing we felt was for a good cause. We enjoyed doing it. We enjoyed working with each other, and there was a lot of partying, typical kind of startup culture, and that DNA, that kind of communication is still very much part of the company. And I think that makes it a really attractive place to work and enjoyable.
But that presumably comes from good leadership, and perhaps the word is regenerative leadership.
Yeah, if you put it that way, it sounds like it was preconceived, that we knew what we were doing. In reality, we didn't. We just enjoyed it. So it just made sense to do it that way, rather than it wasn't some kind of preconceived idea that we needed to create this massive culture. It was just something that came out of the way we just like to work with each other.
Quite lucky then in that respect.
Yeah. Building a successful startup is 90% luck, the right place at the right time, and working hard to try and get it all working.
What about the challenges, the key challenges of the multiplier effect? Because this is the stage when your company, you've gone beyond that sustainable growth stage and you're into the multiplier effect. What can be the key challenges, do you think, in that
era? Staying alive. It really is like a battle. Cabify took 5 years, I think, before it hit proper product market fit, before people started to become aware of the product and started using it on a large scale. That's 5 years of just got to work at some point. We're just battling day by day. I think Cabify, and Juan describes this far better than me, and Cabify died several times during that period. And, trying to stay lean and just focus on building a great product that people love and use ultimately was a thing that came off.
I guess you've also got to rely on the economy and people's ability to spend more at that stage. How do you predict that?
Yeah, you can't. I mean, we started in rough times, so we started in 2011. So the economy hadn't kind of come back at any formal stage at that point. It was still, after the 2008 crisis, it was still difficult to raise money and get people on board. But yeah, so those initial years were complex. One of the main restrictions for Cabify actually in the early days was the problem with the licenses. At the time, we could only use the black cab model, the big black cars, which were executive, they're expensive. It was difficult to find a popular model for that. It wasn't until a few years later when we came up with what was then called Cabify Lite, which are basically the Cabify everybody knows now. It wasn't until we were able to get the licenses in place to be able to do that it actually started multiplying and becoming a much larger company.
Sure. What about the crowding out of the market? The potential that there may be government incentives to be competitive in the same industry. Was that ever an issue for you?
You're referring to the taxis specifically? Yeah. I mean, Cabify has never really been a company that didn't want to work with taxis. We just, Cabify at that stage was more against people owning vehicles and the kind of wasted resources associated with that. So it was never really a battle with taxis, but then for some reason fairly obvious reasons, they felt that we were invading their territory, and that created a lot of friction. But ultimately, it got the word out about Cabify, so it's a tough situation, that one.
So if you could sort of sum up the key success points of Cabify, what have they been along the journey? What have they done right?
It's difficult to describe, be precise now in reusable ways. I think we just come out in my current startup Invopop, we just come out of Y Combinator. And there they give a lot of emphasis on thinking on how you can create a company and remaining basically lean and light and not worrying about too much about having managerial structures or having too many people, just focusing on creating a good product that people like. And I think that's something we did inadvertently at Cabify. We had very restricted with money. You couldn't go crazy spending money all over the place. We had to do things sustainably and in a lean way. And I think that helped massively create a successful company in the early days.
And what about talent retention and also acquisition? Because obviously it seems that you've got some very talented team players who go off to do fantastic things. How do you manage to retain them?
I think, you obviously get a lot of churn when creating a company. A lot of people come and go and decide to go out and do other things. I think just keeping the place enjoyable and making sure the experience is somewhere that. And I think something that helps with Cabify, it is a good company for the founder kind of mentality. There isn't that much hierarchy and structure inside the company, at least not in the early days. As you get bigger, it gets more complicated. And I think that helps bring on talent as well. You feel your ownership of something you're trying to create in the company. And I think that's something I would like to kind of instill as Invopop grows and gets bigger. That kind of feeling of ownership of people being able to work on what they feel is most appropriate and launch something and feel a success. Yeah.
And what about any sort of major flops, any failures that you can look back on and feel that, okay, we shouldn't have done that, but you've learned moving forward from them?
Oh my goodness. Any failures?
And it could just be on a personal level, if not on a generic level.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I consider myself quite technical, quite creative, and as the company grows, the culture changes slightly. There's a lot more politics involved in a larger company, and that shift for me was personally really difficult to kind of figure out where you sit in the company, and ultimately I ended up leaving. And that kind of transition is tough. I think I wasn't prepared for it. And that's one of the key differences I think between like a founder mentality and an employee mentality. For me, it was always about the products and what we could launch and how it would work. And whereas an employee, you're perhaps more worried about your career your next advances inside a company, and that's a big cultural difference between the people creating the company initially, who just want to create something successful, and people who are coming in, obviously want to create something successful, but are worried about the career plan and what steps to take next. And I think that shift it's hard to balance.
I can imagine. Okay, we're gonna. I think Juan Antonio is here. Is that right?
Oh.
Sorry for the delay here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Apologies, I was getting the company uniform to be here. It took me away. So great to be here. Apologies, I had a flat tire and then I couldn't get in. So finally here. So how does it feel now to be a second-time entrepreneur? Is it something that you were eager to do after having to negotiate everything with other people in Cabify? Now you're taking the lead in your new startup. How does it feel?
For me, I don't think there was anything else I could have done. I think after so many years at Cabify, the thought of working for somebody else was utterly terrifying. I think, so what do? You do something that maybe doesn't match with what you want to do in life, or do something really hard. Yeah, just do the thing that's really hard. But
did you already go through the question? Because I was curious about your answer about the one. Are you born an entrepreneur? Or
no, we didn't cover that one.
I wanna hear about that. Answer. Do you think are you born an entrepreneur, or is it something that develops along your life?
I think you're born an entrepreneur and then made. So both. I think there's a certain characteristic of just wanting to do things differently that you're kind of born with, and have this feeling to do things differently. That the status quo isn't quite right. There are things you can do differently.
Yeah, but when you were a kid, I mean, you were brought up in a family where your dad had a company, and you lived, you breathed. So that to some extent made you also
quite possibly. But then my younger brother, he's in the military. So I mean, it's a complete opposite. It's completely formal, structured, very hierarchical, and he had the same upbringing as me. And so I'm not sure. It's a really difficult one. But I think anyone should try. If you've got the feeling to be an entrepreneur, you should definitely try.
And do you think being exposed to your dad going through building his business facilitated you becoming an entrepreneur? Because maybe one of the things we've witnessed during these 12 years at Cabify is the ecosystem has greatly developed. 12 years ago, it was challenging to explain to anyone what a startup was, and if you told anyone, "Hey, I'm starting a company," they thought, "What are you doing with your life?" No? Mm-hmm. But now there is an ecosystem. People understand this is an option in life. So my question to you is, do you think that without that example, without having that option in front of you while you were a kid, you would have considered being an entrepreneur, or you need role models, or you need examples, you need something to...
I do think role models help. I was definitely exposed, and of course my father's company ultimately went bankrupt in the early 90s. It was a very difficult time period in the UK especially. So I saw kind of all the stages of the illusion, the wanting to build and create something, building a large company. I had about 50 employees. It was building motorhomes. So it was building caravans. And then see that collapse, it was quite traumatic for everybody involved. But despite that, we still wanted to go out there and create. I still had that kind of urge to want to build something. I think having that example helps. But then in your case, your parents are entrepreneurs, no?
Yes, well, similar example, although not at the same scale. My dad was a civil servant, but he always wanted to do something on the side. So he was always trying to create businesses, and since I was a kid, I saw him work double shifts, his normal job and then the other one. And I always considered creating a business as an option. I just couldn't find something that was meaningful to me to spend that much time. No? But I was asking you because, I mean, within Endeavor, they are putting the focus on the multiplier effect and how companies like Cabify facilitate people getting to know how startups work, understanding maybe that's an option for them if they haven't had that option before in their life, and then pursuing their own purpose or their own dreams, creating their own companies. No? So, I mean, in my case, it was very helpful to see my dad when I was a kid, but it was also extremely revealing to spend a couple of years in the US doing an MBA in the Bay Area from 2008 to 2010, and then opening my eyes to a world of possibilities. No? 2011 in Spain, there weren't that many options to start a company. Actually, yesterday night we were having dinner and we were mentioning some of the startups that were
trying
back then, because there weren't that many.
Yeah. I mean, so I think one of the things that Y Combinator today I would recommend, if you're kind of in doubt, is if you want to create a company, go work for a startup. And Cabify is a great place to figure out and to see if you think that's something you would like to do. No, I think that's one of the key multiplier effects. Like working in a startup that is, gone through different stages, you can see and speak to people who are actually involved in the early days and doing different things. I think that's super useful to try and help you make that decision.
Yeah, I was listening to you when I arrived, and you were talking about how the culture or the needs of the company evolve, how people evolve. I mean, politics is not necessarily something that appears, but processes and structure are something that are definitely needed, no? as the company evolves. And it is a very different setup when it's 10 people all in the same room, as opposed to 2,000 people in 10 different countries. No? So you need to have some order. And going from 10 to 2,000, 10 people to 2,000, I mean, the learning curve and the changes that you experience are tremendous. No? So if you bring that expertise with you, you probably won't repeat the same mistakes that we went through, which were thousands of mistakes, more than people. No?
Yeah.
And you can create value leveraging on not making those mistakes. No? So it's a good university. If you want to create your own company, maybe you can learn from other people's mistakes by working in a startup.
Absolutely. And again, the Y Combinator, that's one of the key things there as well, that they try and give you the examples of other companies and how they did things. And it was really great for me because we did feel kind of isolated in Cabify. We didn't see many other people going through a similar experience. And Y Combinator, you did see similar companies. Oh yeah, I went through the same kind of thing, same difficulties and same complications. And yeah, it's.
You could argue, I mean, it could be that people who want to create a company are naturally attracted to a company in earlier stages, and then there is another group of people who discover that's an option. They didn't know. They maybe went to work for another startup because they like the industry or whatever, not because they wanted a startup, no? And suddenly they discover that's an option for them as well. So what else do you want to know?
What's next for Cabify? I mean, how are you doing things now to get more founders on board?
So one of the challenges we have as a relatively big company as compared to 10 years ago is to keep empowering people to make their own decisions and to take risks. I mean, startups, probably at Y Combinator, they've told you a lot about this. Few people moving the needle with the ability to make decisions and move fast. No? As companies generate more and more processes, you don't want to lose that ability, especially if you're in an industry like Cabify, where all of the growth is still ahead of us. 2-3% of the journeys within a city are completed by shared vehicles. The vast majority of them are still completed in private vehicles. So all the growth is ahead. That means that you need to continue innovating, and you need to ensure people in your company have the ability to innovate despite all the processes and all of that. No? So that's quite a challenge. We are now reviewing our cultural principles within the company. The ones you used to know will be modified to reflect the needs of the company today. No? Because Those were created in 2017, very different challenges. So, still with a lot of focus on culture and making sure that it is still a startup. It is like they say in Amazon, it's still day one.
Yeah.
You still have all the growth ahead of you. No?
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm not sure. We have time for any questions, or I'm not sure if we're a little bit over. I'm not sure if.
I think maybe there is a microphone there. So. That's the time.
Yeah. Is that the time? Cool.
Hello. So the question is, it's always interesting when you're setting up a company, finding out how the people that build the team meet. Could you explain how you two came across each other?
Go for it.
Yeah. So I met Juan through a Ruby user group here in Madrid. I was at a stage, I was freelancer before Cabify, and I reached this point where I thought, I want to work on something that grows and becomes something much, and see that process. As a freelancer, you work on something, then you leave, and it's not as gratifying. So I knew then that I want to work on something that's going to grow. And just by chance, Juan wrote to the Ruby on Rails user group in Madrid, and I answered. We did a Skype call. We met in a churreria in Bravo Murillo, and like 3 weeks later, we started in Juan's front living room.
Yeah, that was a good match.
Yeah, I think what was unusual at the stage as well, because I'd spoken to lots of entrepreneurs at that time, what was really unique about Juan, he'd had that kind of Stanford experience, which was very rare in, so from San Francisco and everything else. It was very rare at the time in Spain. And he also had funding. I remember that being like a key criteria, because at the time it was very difficult to get funding. So just funding with a deck was extremely rare. I thought, yeah, that's worthwhile investing in.
Since you are we done?
Is it gone?
Now it works. Okay. No, I was going to build a little bit on very rapidly. So 12 years ago, it was extremely challenging to get funding from Spanish business angels. There wasn't an ecosystem. All the money came from the US. But today, fortunately, it's a very different story. You can go fundraise from seed investors in Spain. So you're lucky.
Yeah.
One question for both Sam and Juan. When you were transitioning from an early stage startup to a company that is already 10-year-old that hit product market fit, and for you as well, like coming from one of the people behind Cabify, a 10-year-old company that already product market fit, to starting your own startup, what were the things that you have to unlearn? The things that might work or might be the best for an early stage startup that might not work for like an established company, and vice versa?
That's a good question. Don't hire people. In Cabify, it's a big company, you need lots of people. As a startup, you have to keep lean until you get like product market fit. And that's one of the things we kind of inadvertently did at Cabify without really realizing or thinking about it now. We didn't hire that many people, and we certainly didn't hire managers. It's everyone who was there in the early days was doing something. And ultimately, I think that was one of the keys to success. So that's what we're trying to do now at Invapop. Just keep the team really small until we find that little bit edge of momentum that we think we can get a little bit more leverage, and then start ramping up.
Yeah, in my case, something very similar. At the beginning, we had to do everything. We had to build our desks. We have to, I don't know, we didn't paint the walls, but that was the only thing we didn't do. And then as the company grows, you have to unlearn to do things and make sure you empower people and do not get on their way by throwing opinions, by suggesting something should be done. You have to bite your mouth and let people do things. No? And it's kind of hard when you're used to building your desk.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I've learned through Cabify experience. I'm easier to work with now. In the early days of Cabify,
the opposite will be extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hi. Juan, what do you think about the decision of the European Court of forbid the BTC license limitation?
Well, I mean, I think today we are here talking about other things, about companies. So it's not. I would like to focus on startups and making sure we help other companies to grow. Now that said, in Cabify, we are trying to support cities to have alternatives to private vehicles. We think cities will be better with less private vehicles parked on the streets, and that space being used for people enjoying the city as opposed to cars being parked. And to that extent, we hope and we are sure the politicians who are in charge of thinking in the long term and making sure our cities are meant for the citizens will make the responsible choices they need to make, always thinking about the citizens and the general interest of cities above anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing electronic invoicing now, and that makes life harder for people. No, there's an underlying concept that people will, it should make it easier for companies to communicate between each other, but ultimately it makes things more complicated. So it's a very difficult battle. How do you advance society, but then keep things simple enough so that people will willing to adopt it and figure stuff out more easily. And kind of Invopop is, we're a company that tries to make complex situations easier to deal with. But ultimately, we want things to be easier anyway, so that perhaps Invopop isn't quite as necessary. So it's kind of a contradictory thing there.
No, the purpose of many non-profits and many companies, would be to disappear. Mm-hmm. If you solve the problem, then you should aim for your company or your non-profit to actually not be needed. If you're truly pursuing a purpose, no? You probably find other ways to generate value. But if you focus on your purpose and achieve it, it's like trying to make your company disappear.
Yeah, I agree.